Good afternoon. Good to see you here for the launch of Inform Warning. I'm Andy Thau, I'm the project lead. And Inform Warning is basically a global early warning system for crisis risks. And what we're trying to do with it is to support faster, evidence-based decision-making for crisis preparedness and prevention. We've heard already quite a bit today about data collection, but this event is about another challenge that many of us are facing, which is how do we prioritize in an increasingly complex, increasingly resource-constrained world. In other words, how do we transform that growing volume of data analysis forecasts into decisions about where our attention should go, our resources should go, our action should go. And in this event, we're going to address the central theme of the conference, which is basically transforming scientific innovations into operational decision-making. This is already going wrong. Yeah, good. So we're going to begin with some reflections about the context of this work that we're going to present. A brief presentation of Inform Warning, and the main part of the event is going to be an interactive simulation exercise, so it will allow you to see what Inform Warning does, what you can do with it. So I hope you're all ready for that. And then we're going to have a little bit of time for some Q&A and reflections afterwards. So let's get started, and we're going to start with some opening remarks from Corley Pretorius, the head of research, analytics, learning and innovation from UNDP. Thanks, Corley.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andy, and thank you everyone for listening to me again. We clearly value you as an audience for the work that we're doing, and would again like to encourage your interaction with the Inform Warning platform. I don't want to take a lot of time, but I want to talk about 4 things, or just go through 4 main points. The first is that we are living in a world of increasing risk. And from UNDP side, how we look at this, it's not only looking at the different sectoral risk, or whether it's governance, economic, indebtedness, but it's more about the complexity and the interconnectedness of these risks, and really turning into systemic challenges for colleagues within UNDP, but also within the UN system, and especially our partner governments. So our institutions are not designed to work in this way. I mean, the specialization that we've evolved over the years has really sort of put us nicely into a fragmented system or into silos. And what we are bringing today is a way to actually look at this multidimensionality in a much more systematic way to support decision-making. The second challenge, as I said, is and we've mentioned it a few times this morning, lots of data around, but somehow we are struggling to translate that into action, especially early action and preventive measures. So this is another piece that we are looking at. How do we evolve our institutional capability to, as Andy said, in the context of fewer resources available, really think about prioritization, think about those signals translating into meaningful action much earlier. And for us, we report through our hierarchy, like many others. Decision makers need trusted, accessible insights. So a piece of the processing needs to happen before time, and the sense making to deliver really the insights to our decision making. So this brings me to Inform and Inform Warning. The Inform partnership has been running for more than a decade, creating across many institutions that common platform for collective action. It has been supported by governments, by UN agencies, donors, and partners to really make more informed decisions. And well, Andy will go through the presentation in terms of the different components and the tools. And it really is based on a very simple idea, or a hypothesis, if you like, that if we have better information and relevant information for decision makers, that it would make it easier to prioritize and to put those insights into action. From the beginning of this year, UNDP is convening the informed partnerships, and we're very proud to do that. We're very happy to play that role, and we really appreciate the trust that's put in us to bring the partnership together. This is really its greatest strength. It's not a single institution, and this is also our ambition, is to really continue with a partnership, with a collective effort in terms of making these tools available. And I would, in this sense, really say that the partnership would not have endured through both its technical proficiency and its sustainability if it weren't for the European Commission, the JRC, the Joint Research Centre, as well as support from DG ECHO and from CRAFT as well. So thank you very much for that continued and enduring support and trust. And then just to say, our philosophy is that this is a complex crisis requires a collective endeavor. And on the one hand, of course, and I can assure you, technically it is very good, but the proof of the pudding for the model is not in terms of how well it predicts at the end of the day. The proof of the pudding of the product, like informed warning, is how much does it catalyze collective action. So this is where the invitations stand also, use it, and it's developed. You will get to the technical details. I don't want to give a spoiler alert. Use it in your own systems, but also use it as part of a community that really has an interest and investment in acting early. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Coralie. Okay. Now we're just going to do a little bit of background on Inform, and show you also what Inform Warning is all about, to give you some context basically for the simulation exercise. And that's going to be done firstly by me, and then by Carmen from the JRC. And as Coralie said, Inform, it's a multi-stakeholder partnership. We have UN organizations, technical organizations, civil society organizations, as well as donor government. And basically, what we're trying to do is develop shared and quantitative analysis for crises. JRC is the scientific lead. As Coralie said, UNDP is the coordinator. And basically, what we're trying to do is produce this shared analysis that any organization can use, and that basically involves developing jointly methodologies and then also products. And essentially, what these products do is they aggregate data and information, and they analyze it in a way that is intended to support decision making. And it was particularly talking about decisions on prioritization, and within that, specifically about resource allocation. Okay, and I should acknowledge as well that these products, they're essentially built on the data sets that are produced by many of us in this room. So we can think of Inform as kind of an analytical and decision support layer on top of all of those data sets. And looking at the products themselves, we basically have a kind of a suite of products that are designed around the different stages of the crisis management cycle. So there's the Inform Risk Index, which is about structural crisis risk in a country. There's Inform Severity, which is about comparing the severity of existing crises. We have a Climate Change Risk Index, which is a projection, obviously, into the future of crisis risk, including the impacts of climate change. And now we have also Inform Warning. And that's specifically focusing on a very underserved until now time window, which is the next 1 to 12 months. Okay, so it's showing where and how crises are likely to develop in the next year, and where we might need to take action. So specifically, it's a global open system for identifying how and where crisis risks can occur in the next 12 months. And basically, it aggregates forecasts and trends data and translates them into warning levels and crisis alerts. And it's covering a whole different array of risk types. So you can explore, obviously, we have a platform, and there's also an API, so you can pull this into your own systems. So without going into too much detail, basically just going to give you a list of some key features. So it's the first global system, we think, to support this type of anticipatory decision-making across all different crisis types. As I said, it's forward-looking, so we're looking at this 1 to 12 months time horizon, which has such huge demand in terms of planning for crisis prevention and preparedness. It's translating essentially a lot of forecast information into standardized signals that are comparable between countries and between risks, and you'll hear a bit more about how that works. It's providing these clear outputs, so country warning level and crisis alerts, which are intended to signal where our attention is needed in terms of early funding, planning, and action. We are using AI to make it a little bit more efficient in the workflow, but it's primarily an expert-developed methodology that is forming the core of informed warning. So we're trying to balance the efficiency, but keep the analytical rigor. I mentioned already the collaboration element. So this has been designed collaboratively with a big working group of users from the multilateral and technical communities. And lastly, it's all open. So the results are open, the methodologies are all open, so it should be easy to incorporate into your systems. So how would you use it? Well, there's 4 main areas. So we can talk from general to a bit more specific. So advocacy, providing the evidence for anticipatory action. Prioritization, which is probably almost the main one. How do we use it for earlier funding decisions and better coordination? In more detail, there's a planning use case, so including at the country level, using it for scenario development, contingency planning, this kind of stuff. And then lastly, there's the analytical part. So you can access all of the data that feeds in there. So you can go in there and do country-based or thematic analysis. And to give you a couple of specific examples, so these are from member organizations of the working group that we had to put this together. So IFRC will use this to help trigger their early action protocols, which is a way for them to trigger funding and action in a country. The Central Emergency Response Fund of the UN will use it to help make faster allocations from their rapid response window. At UNDP, we're going to use it for risk monitoring at country, regional, global level, and also to support our contribution to the UN regional monthly review, which is a way that we basically turn all of this analysis into action inside the UN. And we'll hear a bit later on from ECHO about how they will use it. So lastly from me, just in terms of the impacts, we hope this is going to help us act earlier, act with more certainty. At the global level, we hope that it will also lead to focusing resources in the right place. We already heard in the last presentation about the imbalance sometimes between where the resources are going and the most consequential risks. At the country level to help us understand why risk is increasing, what we should do about it, and then more broadly, be more aligned between different parts of the system, whether it's donors, organizations on the ground, and so on. So ultimately, we're trying to translate these early risk signals into some practical decision support that gives us greater confidence in acting early to prevent and prepare crises. Okay, that's it for me from now. Over to Carmen to tell us a bit how it works. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Remember to move your slides. It's up there on the, yeah, the green button, yeah.
So the talks of the whole day were actually the perfect introduction for the informed warning. I must thank you for that. So when you're making life-saving decisions, you simply cannot rely on the black box. I hope you agree with that with me. So you need to know what a tool can do. You need to know the limitation of the tool and exactly how the logic works. So my goal today is to explain you a bit of methodology, but only a bit. The rest you can read about it in our informed warning user guide, freshly printed. We brought a few copies to share with you, but you can also download it from the platform website. Informed warning is designed to be a transparent and practical tool for anticipatory action planning. And it is built to evolve as the science evolves. And to create informed warning, we first select the most reliable forecast indicators that are mirroring the informed risk framework that maybe some of you know. Though it's a bit reduced set, because not every hazard and not every vulnerability aspect can be forecast yet. But the real challenge lies somewhere else. With informed products, you are probably used to composite indicators. They are great for background reality comparison. But in early warning, this traditional averaging is our enemy. Imagine that you have a sudden violent conflict spike in the country with rather stable economy. The averaging process smooths out that spike. And you simply, essentially hide the sign of the crisis in the mud. And to fix that problem, we didn't start with composite indicator approach this time. We designed a signal first. Signals are actually the heart of informed warning. It's the primary feature that you will maneuver it. A signal is a normalized anomaly. It identifies where the next 12 months looks nothing like the past. But signal is just an alarm. And to make it operationally useful, we aggregate signals. We combine them with informed risk and informed severity score to finally calculate warning level. While signal tells us that something is changing, on the other side, warning level tells us how much this change matters. So in other words, it shows us where the countries where rising risks might overwhelm national capacity. So when the warning level hits very high level, it triggers the crisis alert, where users can start to prioritize their planning. So we can call it like a kind of analytical pipeline of the data that enter into the system. And to manage this analytical pipeline that moves from the forecast to the crisis alert, that moves us from the global noise to the local actionable data, and also bridges risk we know and the severity we fear, we built up a platform with 3 distinct modules. The first one is data registry. Is our foundation for the transparency. It's completely open source, and you can find there the why behind every alert. The next one is the risk monitor, is your dashboard for change. We are still very much on the risk side, but it filters the noise, so you can see countries where signals are starting to blink. While with the crisis alert, we are already crossing the bridge to the potential severity of the crisis. We are narrowing lenses down to the crisis level, which is actual operational planning level. And this is where actually the vision of informed warning comes to life. Science is not yet there, but we are going beyond the high risk toward the known impact. We are reaching the point when we are able to tell you, for example, that the deteriorating crisis in Somalia in 6 months will likely mirror the severity of Afghanistan crisis today. And when we are able to compare the future threat with familiar reality, we stop thinking and we start acting. And to show you how this works in practice, it is my pleasure to pass the floor to my colleagues.
Hello, hello. Thank you. So thank you, Carmen, for that. So we're going to be very brave now, and we're going to make Anders and the media team sweat, because we got a live poll coming up. So yeah, we thought to actually include this for the scenario building, actually to kind of get your input as well, rather than it's just us talking. So we'll have actually 4 Slido questions interspersed in the next, hopefully maybe 20 minutes or so. So I think the plan is really just for some of these questions to pop up as we go along. And I just call on you, if you still have battery on your phone, just to scan the QR code and yeah, just fill out the answers. So I think we can go to the next slide, or basically just you can already directly share the computer screen. Yeah, perfect. So this is basically the first question, and this is just touching upon what Andy mentioned about the potential use cases of informed warning. So we really just want to understand what kind of audience we have here today. So we talked about, if you have access to this kind of analysis that translates multi-hazard forecasts into crisis risks in the next 12, how would you use it? So are you more on the advocacy side? Are you more on the prioritization side? Are you on the analysis side, or are you on the planning side? So we're getting some, I see some numbers pop up. So we have around 20 now, so this is perfect. I think I'm just going to give it maybe like a few more seconds for people to answer, but I think you can start sharing the computer screen. Nice. Actually, this is kind of in a way what I had imagined. That actually we have quite a room full of analysts, or actually not full, but the analysts is predominantly the one. This is actually really interesting. I think this is also very helpful for us to understand. So yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, we've ran this in Geneva in the HMPW. I think that was quite different. So it's actually really good to see the difference. Perfect. Okay. So thank you. You get a star for this one. Then on to the next one. I'm just going to give you a challenge. This one is actually more to see kind of your knowledge of the world in a way. So based on your current knowledge of the world, which country would you prioritize for action to manage emerging crisis risks in the next 1 to 12 months? So hopefully the Slido works. So this is within like you can rank. So I'm just curious what people come up with here. I think this is intentionally a sort of a potentially a hard question to answer, or potentially super easy, depending on how you see the world. But I'm just curious to see. Maybe run that a little bit. So we have Sudan, Afghanistan, Burkina Faso, Bolivia, Thailand, and so far Australia is at the end. All right. Okay. So this is also super interesting. And now maybe we can go back to the PowerPoint. Anders, thank you so much. Because actually this is a perfect opportunity to kind of show you a little bit of how we at Inform Team and Inform Warning would actually kind of go along with these countries. And before I dive into actually how what the ranking is, I actually would want to kind of walk you through a little bit of what you would see if you go to the platform today and you'll go to the Risk Monitor site, then you would see kind of this table, and there are basically 4 important pieces of information for you to consider. The first one is the warning signal. And Carmen already mentioned some of this, so I just want to kind of go one layer deeper. So it's the warning signal, and that's actually the aggregation of these signals. It's a score out of 10, and it's really just an aggregation of the top 3 signals that contribute in that country. So you can think about it as, okay, a high warning signal means that there is some forecasts that are showing us signals that are basically the situation is likely to worsen, right? Then you have these little 3 pills next to it, that actually show you what these three risks or what these three signals are. I'll go through an example later. Then we have the informed risk and severity context, which Andy mentioned, so I hope you all now know what those are. And these are very important because actually that leads directly to the warning level. So this is the final level of aggregation, which is the final number, you can think about it, and this is the one where it actually shows us where the impacts might require an international response. And to kind of take you through an example, so for example, we do have Afghanistan. So if we take the warning signal, we see that it's 4.1, which is actually on the medium scale, where we see the top signals that we forecast in the next 12 months to be the dry condition, wet conditions, and battles. The dry conditions actually, I think it's basically in the south of Afghanistan, wet conditions is in the north, that's predicted. And we can see that this 4.1 is actually increased to 6.8 because Afghanistan already has high, and very high, in fact, informed risk and severity. So that's kind of how generally the aggregation works. And we do this for all 191 countries in the data set. So I hope you see now that it's sort of relatively intuitive. It's everything sort of 1 out of 10, which is the hallmark of informed products. So to kind of get you the results, as you now maybe hopefully understand, you can look at it from two different lenses, right? Like there's the warning signal, just looking at purely the forecasts of like actually what we expect to happen, and the warning levels. So actually, if we look at just the warning signals, it's actually Thailand ranks the highest. It's actually 5th out of the 191 countries, because actually the dry conditions, actually we also see a signal for inflation as well as battles. And then actually it's Bolivia, again because of dry conditions predominantly. There's some river flow anomaly that we're capturing, and annual inflation. Then it's actually Burkina Faso. I'm not going to go like in detail, but I think I wanted to bring up because actually Australia ranks 18th, and you know none of you picked Australia, and I think that's for right reasons. But I think there is also the lens to look at it, and this is very much foreshadowing to what Sefer is going to talk about. Is there's actually very strong El Nino effect is forecasted, and there actually we see very severe drought in Australia, and then actually Afghanistan and Sudan rank the lowest of these countries that we picked, because actually the forecasts aren't, and sort of they're not out of the norm of what we would expect from the background and from the historical data. But then of course from the warning level, this is maybe kind of what you then expect a little bit more to mirror what you kind of already know, where we do take the structural risks and ongoing crisis information into account. So actually here, Burkina Faso ranks 2nd out of all the 191 countries with a score of 7.5. Then Sudan, then Afghanistan, then Thailand, and then Bolivia and Australia. So just to give you a flavor of how informed warning would rank, and particularly as well how these two lenses of looking at this data is important to keep in mind. All right, then we have the next one. So this is going to be a little bit more brain power for you required. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you true detailed forecasts for 2 anonymized countries. And taking all of this information in, I just want you to prioritize. Which one would you prioritize for anticipatory action? So let me go. I'll walk you through it a little bit. So we have country A. The IPC forecast, so the phase 3 food insecurity forecast is predicted to be 34 million, which is actually almost a 7.5 million increase from the last estimate. In terms of natural hazards, we actually see very strong wet conditions to be forecasted within the next year. Displacements, we actually forecast 100,000 people to be further 100,000 people to be displaced from battles, fatalities, or battles and violence against civilians. We actually see a very high forecast, quite above what's been the norm lately. For fatalities, decreases, and actually for economy, we seem to have stabilizing inflation. For country B, it's 9.2 million, and actually this is roughly the same as what was the last estimate. From natural hazards, we see wet conditions in the north and dry conditions in the south. But actually, in terms of the battles, fatalities, and violence, it's very similar types of forecasts that we see. So we for battles and violence, we actually expect quite high levels compared to the norm, and for fatalities to decrease. And we don't know inflation. We know that inflation is increasing. So I think now we can jump to the Slido, and so you can vote. And this is interesting. Nice, good. We're getting a spread. And I'm sure there's people in the audience, oh, but we don't know this or we don't know that, and of course, but this is really meant for just to kind of give you an idea of just the scenario testing. So that's all the information that was available to you at that moment. Nice, okay, 50, 50, 60-40. This is really good. I think this is really good. I think we're up to 60, so I think we can move on. Perfect. Now I'm going to let that run, but I think we can go back to the presentation. Thanks, Anders. So to dive right in, not to dive right into the answers, but actually one step deeper into the risk monitor is actually this is the information that risk monitor allows you to see. So what the country level of the risk monitor will allow you to see is actually see these predictions or these risk signals in the 1 to 12 months. So these are the red bars. So if you see a red bar, that's the signal, and it's from 0 to 10, where high is basically we expect things to worsen. But we also show blue lines are what is actually forecasted. Yellow lines are basically the historical data. And for those that are really against charts, we also have a heat map where you can see this as well. And of course, you can download everything. So to kind of walk you through how informed warning would see these countries, we have the 1 and 2. So for the country A, we have battles, wet conditions, and violence against civilians was actually the top 3 signals that were picked up. So these are the 3 contributing signals. And as you can see, battles and wet conditions, we see very, very strong signals. So these are, I think, almost 10 or just about there. So these are very strong signals for battles and wet conditions, while the violence is still around, I think, around 4. What this means when we kind of aggregate the level up is in the warning signals, if we look at either 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, because this is the kind of data we can actually play around with. It's not only 12 months. You can look at, is it okay? Is it only in 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months? We see that actually in the most left-hand column, we see that it's 8.8, 8.9, 7.8. So this is kind of like the averages. So these are very high numbers. And kind of the big reveal is that this is Nigeria, where actually the warning level is 7.9 because the informed risk and severity is well already high. So what we see is the warning signal is 7.8 for the next 12 months. So this is already very high. And you combine that with the very high informed risk and high informed severity score. This pushes the warning level up to 7.9. And then for country B, the interesting part was actually it's exactly the same 3 top signals. So these are, what we're kind of expecting to happen in the 2 countries are very similar, where we also have wet conditions, battles, and violence against civilians. But maybe already you see that from like the height of the red graphs is actually the signals are lower, right? So they're roughly hovering around 4. And we can already see that in the warning signals. It's around a magnitude lower in the next 3, 6, or 12 months. And then what I can tell you now is basically it was Pakistan, where it's the warning level is 6.2, where actually if we just look at the forecasted signals, it's around 4.2 out of 10 for the next 12 months. And this is okay, and combined with high levels of risk and severity, so it pushes it to 6.2. And actually, just one note on the Nigeria part is that's the one in the latest update. It's the highest ranking country. So this is the highest, 7.9 is the highest number that we see in the latest data update. And with that, actually, I'll pass it on to Sepper, my colleague, who's going to talk a little bit about Nigeria.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you very much, Rado. So now I move to the final question. So given that Nigeria has the highest warning level, as Rado mentioned, so what would be the most useful further information to you to inform anticipatory funding and actions? So, here, sorry. Please select 3 out of 6. So, subnational. Nice, so it's actually in line. Please go back to slides. So, our attempt to provide this further information is actually the creation of the crisis alert module of the tool. As you can see here, these are published for the highest, for the countries with the highest warning levels. In this case, Nigeria. The purpose is to draw attention to the most consequential emerging risks globally to provide more information that can directly support anticipatory planning and also preparedness decisions. As you can see here, each alert includes first a focus on the signals driving the alert, top 3 signals, here you can see, and also at subnational level detail. So not just, so the difference with some other parts of Inform is here we are including some subnational details. Then the second part is contextual information on the crisis. Here we draw on external humanitarian sources like Relief Web and ACAP's Risk Radar, summarized with LLMs, large language models, and then also verified by our analysts. And finally, the scenarios, or we call them storylines, with impact estimates, including potential changes in Inform Severity Index, introduced before, which allows global comparison across crises. So you would use these alerts for more detailed preparation and also decision-making for specific scenarios. So how do we make these scenarios, actually? So a human analyst sits down with the signals for Nigeria alerts, extracted from the previous part, the risk monitor. In this case, it's conflict, flooding, and food insecurity, and then works through what they would mean actually on the ground in terms of compound and cascading impacts of the crisis severity and actually how the crisis would actually shift based on these forecasted signals. So Inform Severity is an index between 0 and 10. It includes impacts of the crisis, conditions of the people affected, and also the complexity of the country in terms of delivering humanitarian assistance. So in this case, you see that Nigeria is already among the countries with severe crisis. So the first scenario or storyline, we assume, okay, based on the forecast of the food insecurity, the food insecurity depends in the country, so there would be a shift in the severity index. And then in the second scenario, we assume this food insecurity is compounded by inflation and also the conflict situation in Nigeria based on an analog we had before is getting worse, and because of the limited humanitarian access, this severity will shift forward and in the same band as Somalia, for example. And this is how it gives the humanitarian community a chance to act before actually this threshold is crossed. So all the previous examples walked you through the platform and its capabilities. So to close, we would like to show you a real use case. We used Inform Warning for, as Rado mentioned, the super El Nino. We are forecasting for this year and next year. And to see how informed warning captures these compounding impacts of such complex phenomena at country level, and especially for countries in a fragile state. So the climatic impacts of El Nino are shown in 3 indicators from informed warning. One is the dry conditions, wet conditions, and high river flow anomaly. So we take the dryness example here. So in the next 6 months, so 3, 6, and 12 months, we take the 6 months here, and we interpret the results from informed warning in 3 steps. First, the dryness signal, or it can be drought. We rank the countries. Australia comes up, actually. It will be very dry, as Rado mentioned. But you see in the Sankey diagram, it stops there, so it doesn't have very high warning signal or warning level. Then the second part is the warning signal. It's how the compounded signals are in that case. So Bolivia comes up because the dryness could be compounded with inflation, very high inflation, and violence. So it goes up to very high warning signal, but because of the structural risk and the severity of existing crisis, which is moderate in this case, it doesn't reach the very high warning level. And third is the warning level. So where we have these compounding signals landing on a fragile context, which is the case of Ecuador, Venezuela, and Haiti. So they rise up to the top of the high warning signal list. So this is actually one of the features of the tool, is to give you the opportunity to tailor this to your decision. So if you're only interested in seeing the signals, for example, conflict in the next 3, 6, or 12 months ahead, so you just focus on that. If you want to see the compounding impacts, you go for the warning signals. And then if you want to see how all these, in the country's fragility context, you take the warning levels. And finally, this is another example. It's for river flow anomaly. So in this case, we see that 3 countries, Iraq, Tanzania, comes up with the very high warning levels. One is compounded with inflation and violence against civilians. And for Iraq, it's inflation and economic contraction. Both are good cases for anticipatory planning and action. So the results of these El Nino analysis has been used in a policy brief to the cabinet, and also a report that just been published today. So we will put the link here, and would be happy if you check it out. So thank you very much. I pass it to Andy for the wrap-up.
Thanks, guys. That was all super interesting. Just in the interest of time, we were going to do some Q&A now, but I think we'll just leave it till the end so we see how much time we have left. But what I love about this example is I think it shows so many things about what we hope will make informed warning useful. So it's taking that technical forecast data and it's interpreting them for us, essentially. People like me who wouldn't know their way around a a climate forecast. It's turning that data into signals actually about how meaningful the forecasts are, which is often a step that's difficult for us even when we can interpret the forecast. It's showing how these different risks can compound. It's adding a context about what's already going on in the country in terms of crisis risk, in terms of crises, and it's wrapping all of that together into something which we can use as a tool to prioritize in advance and then support those countries to prevent and mitigate those emerging risks. So now we're going to hear two presentations from, let's say, more about the applications of informed warning. So the first is from Isabel de Schrijver from ECHO. So ECHO is a long-standing supporter and user of Inform. She's going to talk to us about how ECHO can and will use informed warning. And then the second is more of a kind of an independent, let's say, reaction to the opportunities and the challenges that this session raises, and that's from Johannes Hengelbrock from the German Federal Foreign Office. Okay, Isabel, over to you. I think you've got everything you need. Here's the machine. It's the green button to move forward.
Okay. Thank you, Andy, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, today I would like to give you a brief overview of how we do the funding allocation in DG ECHO, our humanitarian aid funding allocation. And I would like to explain to you that we do this based on the needs of the people and that we are already using quite a lot inform risk, inform severity in the house. But still, we miss a piece because we miss the anticipatory part of the evaluation of the needs of the people. And to do our funding allocation, this is a process that we start actually in year 1+1. This means that now we have started already to do the needs assessment for the people in need and to do the allocation for next year. And how do we do this? Well, first, in the beginning of the year, we have the available budget and we have the difficult choices that we have to make among all the crises and among the different countries. To do this, we use inform risk and inform severity. We use both indexes and we combine this information with expert input through our expert survey. So every year we have a survey and we collect information from our experts in the field that we will then group with the input from inform risk and inform severity. Input that we integrate into our methodology and then our algorithm, which will then provide a first estimate of the funding, the budget for the countries for the years after. And this is then integrated in what we call our HIPs, our Humanitarian Implementation Plans, and our yearly worldwide decision. These are the documents in which we describe the humanitarian response for the year after. And you see here actually that the timing is important. You see we work in year -1 for actions that will take place through our partners in the next year. But we don't want only to do funding allocation because we want absolutely that the humanitarian principles would be respected. We also, as I just explained, want our aid to be delivered based on needs. And so we need a solution that allows us to cover many countries, that has also a scientific basis, a strong scientific basis, and this is why originally when we developed the methodology, we already started to use inform risk and inform severity. Also because they are based on evidence. And what is important also for us, it is to combine this quantitative and qualitative information. And all these elements, actually, we found it in the informs with the humanitarian principles are supported, there is a strong methodology behind tools, and there is also a scientific rigor, because it's developed under the scientific lead of our colleagues in the Joint Research Center of the Commission, and also many partners, including UNDP, who work on the solidity of the methodology behind the tools. So this work is validated by a large community of involved actors, and it gives also the best possible evidence for the tools that we use. It is also totally transparent. I don't know if you have seen the tool. It's actually an Excel tool that you can use, and if you are interested to go deeper, you can go further than only using the index, but you can see really each element, each sub-indicator that is used to generate the index. It gives also a common approach to the crisis, and it helps also to compare crises, and it's a common language. It's a bit like when you use meters, everybody knows what it means, and here it allows you to compare crises, which is sad to say, but important when you need to allocate the funding. And then very important also, this helps us also to combine with the input from our colleagues in the field. DG ECHO has around 50 offices spread all over the world, and each office follows the situation on the ground for several countries. And that allows us also to complete the data, because sometimes it happens that the colleagues in the field have an insight on the ground that is not yet available, or that is not available in data, but that allows to enrich the analysis that we do. So this brings us then to an overview of the methodology, and you recognize the different elements I already presented, which is the informed risk that gives information about the structural risk, the risk of a country to face a crisis that would overwhelm its capacities to face and to cope with the crisis in the future. We combine this with informed severity, and we do an average with the people in need value, which is an estimation giving the number of people in need in a country or in a region in a country. And both together constitute our quantitative information that counts for 80% in our algorithm. And then we complete it with an expert survey. So the answers to the questions that we receive from the field and from our experts in the headquarters in Brussels is also injected in the algorithm. But you see here that we miss actually an important part, because, and this leads me to the last slide, because we have this timing dimension, we have informed risk for a longer period, and we have the now with informed severity, with how severe is the crisis now, but we miss something in between, and this missing piece in between, that will be for us the informed warning. Informed warning will help us to see, because as I explained, we do now the analysis for next year, and informed warning will help to see how a crisis may evolve between the moment where we assess the funding now and the actions that will take place next year. So in how far is it expected that the crisis can worsen, and so also need for more budget than what we can expect now. So, thank you very much.
Hannes, you want to just come straight up?
Yes.
Green button should take you to
the
your...
green? Yeah.
Yeah. Keep going. There you go.
All right. Thanks, Andy. And first, congrats to you and the team for the successful development and now the launch of this tool. We as a GFFO are not a user of info warning yet, but we have observed the development from the perspective of a potential stakeholder and a donor through CRAFT. And we as a crisis early warning unit at the GFFO have used a similar, though not as sophisticated, but a similar tool that integrated different forecasts, different trends, trend monitoring systems into a single tool that we used for monitoring risks and for prioritizing crises. We have developed this because Preview, as some of you know, has historically we have put a lot of effort into predictive models for conflict risks, and we have made the experience that the concrete operationalization and the concrete outcomes that these models are working with, they often do not very well align with the intuition of policymakers and decision makers who have a understanding. For them, crisis is a multi-dimensional, multi-hazard phenomena, which I think very well aligns with how informed warning understands crisis as a multi-hazard problem. And also we often had the problem of translating the outcomes of prediction models to something that is understandable for decision makers. We had to put it into a narrative and to explain what's actually driving the forecast, why are we seeing an elevated risk. And I think also this is what informed risk is actually addressing with providing the context for what's actually driving the crisis. So I think that's why the things that you guys have developed and what we have developed at GFFO at a smaller scale is actually quite comparable. And I wanted to highlight some of the challenges that we have experienced with these type of indicators. The first thing that I want to raise is that in order to be able to compare different type of crises over the world, you have to apply some sort of uniform scheme in which you, you weigh different indicators globally in the same way for every region. And in our experience, this often does not very well align with how policymakers understand crises. Because, I mean, to get back to the initial example, the countries or examples of Burkina Faso and Australia, they are not only completely different in terms of crisis types, but they are also completely different in terms of what kind of instruments and what kind of interests we as a German Federal Foreign Office, as an example, have in this region. So it's difficult to see the multifaceted crisis through a single lens. Second challenge is that in a fast-paced environment like the Federal Foreign Office, where information that is 4 weeks old is already seen as being outdated, we saw the danger of giving too much weight to recent trends or short-term forecasts and ignoring the long-term structural factors that actually drive elevated risk of future crises. That's where we had to push back a bit against the intuition of policymakers who are very keen on observing the most recent information and a bit less interested in the long-term structural factors that are a bit slower moving. Then, of course, all the advantages that an indicator like informed warning and index has, makes crises of different types comparable. It's also one of the problems. You lose a lot of information because you have to by making it comparable, you have to make technical choices, sometimes seen as technical choices like normalization or everything that an index requires. That is hard to explain, and also, at least that is our experience, that is difficult to get information on how the stakeholders actually value different things, because they perceive it as a very technical task. And of course, that's also what you addressed. Indices only serve as a first analytical entry point. A 6.5 out of 10. Yeah, that's nothing that you can communicate to policymaker. You need to give a narrative. From our perspective, informed warning bridges the gap between structural long-term risk of informed risk and current crisis management that informed severity provides. So it's, I think, a good fit that also with the perspective of 1 to 12 months ahead, aligns very well with the horizon that the GFFO looks at in terms of crisis early warning. Its open methodology and global coverage allows us to integrate it into our frameworks, which is great. And I think it has also the potential to establish a common baseline for prioritizing critical humanitarian developments across different organizations. The last thing that I want to stress is, and that Andy has touched upon in the beginning, the availability of open public data sets is critical for enabling tools like informed warning. And we have seen, I think, in the last 20 years, massive increase of the availability of open data sets, which is now a bit in danger, I think, because of two things. Budget cuts, obviously. We've all seen what happened to FUSE with the USAID budget cuts. And not only the cuts, also the reallocation from funding public open source projects like this one to moving to tools like Palantir, which is closed source and serves different purposes. So let's hope that this trend that we have seen in the last years does not continue in this way. And thanks again for any of the team. And
Thanks.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Johannes. I think in the interest of time, maybe we're going to skip the Q&A. I feel like we won't probably be able to do justice to your questions, but a lot of the answers, I suspect, will be in this brochure, which is at the front here, and of course will be around. So just to try and wrap things up, if we go back to these conference themes, I think we can say we covered here quite a few of them. So I hope through the simulation exercise you saw the practical application of this tool, so how we can use it in crisis settings to really help drive decision making. And I hope as well with the launch today, we're going to see some uptake of it. That's translating all of the work everyone's done behind it into something which is really useful for you. And thirdly, we can talk also about this idea of collaboration over competition. So today there was a lot of mention of data pipelines. I think we can also talk in a broader sense about decision pipelines or decision-making pipelines. It's critical that we all collaborate to make that decision pipeline work. So there's all of us here in different organizations doing different things, which are all part of that pipeline, from data collection to analysis to decision support to decision making. And it's critical that we all collaborate to make sure that that pipeline functions. And this community is therefore a very, very important one for bridging that gap between the data and the action. So with that, I'll leave you to find the information here. So Informed Warning is now available and live. So please go and use it. Please test it, challenge it, think about how it will support your own work. And that's this from us. Thanks to all of our speakers, and of course many people who contributed to Informed Warning, and of course the organizers. And enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of the conference. Thank you.